I woke up to the sound of a spoon hitting an empty bowl. My father had dropped it while trying to pour himself cereal. I didn't understand what was happening at first. My mom never let him near the stove. She was always up before everyone, boiling the kettle, turning on the radio, dancing barefoot across the kitchen, and humming old songs. The house woke up with her. But that morning, everything was different. I lay on the couch, watching him stand at the stove in just a shirt, stirring something in a pot. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I remember every detail: the damp cloth on the table, the smell of scorched milk, the kind of silence that swallows up all sound. My mom was gone. Not just from the kitchen, from everywhere. And I felt it in every part of me. It had only been a few days since she was taken to the hospital. Dad told me everything would be fine, that she just needed some rest. But then he came home without her bag, without a word. He just sat at the edge of a chair and rubbed his forehead like he was trying to erase whatever thought had taken over his mind. I didn't ask anything. I didn't need to. I understood. From that moment, life didn't just change. It shattered. I tried to pretend I was holding it together. School, homework, books, it all stopped meaning anything. I wandered through the house like a ghost, repeating her routines to feel a sliver of warmth. I set her mug beside mine. I opened the window like she always did. But every night, when I locked the door, I knew she wouldn't be back. Dad withdrew into silence. Not anger, not sadness, just silence. We lived under the same roof, but in separate worlds. He worked, came home, stared at nothing. I cooked dinner, set the table for two, and watched him eat without a word. We didn't talk. Not because we didn't want to, but because we didn't know how to start. Sometimes I thought I'd forgotten her voice. Memory is strange. It deletes the very things you cling to most. I tried to sketch her face from memory, jot down the scents that reminded me of her, wear her sweaters. But all it did was remind me how empty everything felt. When I say everything disappeared, I'm not being dramatic. This isn't a movie. It wasn't a rough patch. It was cold, quiet reality. I was alone even though my father slept in the room next to mine. With time, I started to realize that kids grow up too fast when a parent dies. No one asks if you're ready. No one prepares you. I didn't know how to grieve properly, how to cry for real, or how to ask for help. I just pretended I was okay. That was my mistake. To outsiders, I probably looked like a normal, withdrawn teenager. But inside, it was isolation I had built myself. I locked myself in. And when, 3 years later, Dad said he wanted to be happy again and introduced me to a woman he'd apparently been seeing for a while, I didn't feel anything. No anger, no jealousy, just emptiness. And you know what? That's the scariest part. Because when you feel nothing, that means something inside you already died. When she moved in, I didn't feel threatened. I didn't feel anything at all. That was the problem. My father brought her into our lives with a quiet announcement over breakfast, as if she had always been part of the plan. He said we needed fresh air in the house. I wasn't sure what he meant, but he looked lighter when he said it, like something heavy had been lifted off his chest. She was kind, polite, and moved carefully through our home, as if afraid to touch anything too hard, in case it shattered. She brought her son with her, a boy just 1 year younger than me. He didn't say much, just nodded politely when introduced, then went straight to his room. We lived under the same roof, and yet for the first few weeks, we were strangers occupying the same space. The house felt different. Cleaner, maybe, brighter. There were new flowers in the hallway, new cushions on the couch, new groceries in the fridge. And yet I still felt displaced, like I'd missed the memo that life had restarted without me. I tried to follow along. I showed up at dinners, smiled at the right moments, helped set the table. But inside, I was frozen. He and I would cross paths in the hallway, brushing shoulders in that awkward, narrow space between the stairs and the kitchen. I never knew whether to look at him or look away. He never made me uncomfortable. He was quiet, respectful, and spent most of his time with headphones on, lost in books or music. Still, I could feel his presence constantly. And sometimes when I looked up, he was already watching me. Not in a threatening way, more like he was trying to figure me out. There were moments I questioned whether I was imagining things. Maybe I was overly sensitive. Maybe I was projecting my discomfort onto someone who didn't deserve it. He never crossed any lines. If anything, he kept his distance. But the silence between us wasn't empty. It was thick, like both of us were waiting for something to break it. We weren't children anymore. I had just started college and he was finishing high school. Our routines rarely overlapped, but when they did, there was an unspoken agreement to keep things brief, polite, neutral. Still, I started noticing patterns. He always waited for me to finish with the bathroom before going in. He'd leave extra food for me on the counter. Little gestures I couldn't explain but couldn't ignore. I tried to remind myself that we were just two people thrown into a situation we didn't choose, that it was normal to feel awkward, that I was reading too much into it. And maybe I was. But it didn't change the way my stomach tightened every time I heard his footsteps coming up the stairs, or the way I caught myself looking at the door, hoping it was him. That's when I realized something I didn't want to admit. This wasn't just about discomfort. It wasn't even about confusion. I was starting to notice him in a way I shouldn't. I hated the thought, not because it was wrong in some dramatic, forbidden way, but because it made me feel like I didn't know myself at all. It felt like betrayal, not to anyone else, but to the version of me I thought I was. I'd spent years building walls, staying quiet, keeping everything under control. But now, with one look, one silent moment, those walls were starting to shift. And I wasn't sure I liked what was underneath. The night it happened didn't begin with anything special. That's what made it so unforgettable. There was no tension in the air, no sign, no reason to expect the shift. My father and his wife had left for a short trip, just 5 days. And the house was quiet in a way I hadn't felt before. Not hollow, just paused. I thought I'd enjoy the space. I had plans. Finish some assignments, clean out my closet, maybe get some sleep for once. But I did none of those things. Instead, I kept ending up in the living room, the same place he always gravitated to after school. That evening, we sat on opposite ends of the couch, barely speaking, a movie playing in the background like white noise. I don't even remember what we were watching. Something romantic, I think, ironically. At first, I focused on the snacks. The soda was too fizzy, the fruit too cold. I remember noticing that my hand was trembling when I reached for a napkin. I told myself I was tired. That was always the easiest excuse. But the truth was, I could feel his presence like static. Not touching me, not even near, but there. The scene changed. The couple on screen leaned in close. The kiss was slow, predictable, the kind of thing you see 100 times and forget. But that moment, on screen, hit like a match against dry wood. The room went quiet. He didn't move. Neither did I. I didn't even breathe. My hands stayed frozen on the blanket, but I could feel my chest rising faster than normal. When I finally glanced at him, he was already looking at me. Not boldly, not shyly either. Just watching. His eyes didn't shift when I met them. There was no smirk, no intention in his face. Just silence. And in that silence, something in me caved. I turned toward him. I didn't plan it. I didn't weigh the consequences. There was no voice in my head warning me to stop. I just leaned in, slowly, almost experimentally, and he did the same. Our lips met somewhere in the middle. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't intense. It was short, quiet, real. And when we pulled away, neither of us said a word. I sat back slowly, as if waking up from something. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was clarity, sharp and sudden, the kind that only happens when a line you never meant to cross has been crossed. The rest of the movie played on, but I didn't hear it. I didn't hear anything at all. Just the sound of my own thoughts screaming inside my head. What just happened? I didn't regret it. That was the worst part. I should have felt disgust, shame, panic. But all I felt was a strange sense of peace. As if I'd done something inevitable. Something that had been hovering between us for months, finally given a name. Still, that night, after he went upstairs, I stayed on the couch, trying to untangle the knot of emotion that had wrapped itself around my chest. I wasn't a child anymore, but I also wasn't someone who made reckless choices. So what did that make me? I sat in the dark, staring at the blank TV screen, realizing that nothing had changed. And yet everything had. And from that moment on, no matter how much we pretended, we both knew. We couldn't go back. The next morning, everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. I went through my routine like always, brushed my teeth, made toast, sat in the kitchen with the same mug in my hands. But I couldn't stop replaying the night before in my head, every second of it. The way we leaned in, the way it just happened. No hesitation, no panic. Just stillness, then motion, then silence again. He didn't come downstairs until much later. When he did, he didn't even look surprised to see me there. He just grabbed a cereal box and sat across from me, like we were strangers again. Like nothing had changed. And maybe nothing had, on the surface. But deep down, I knew everything was different. We didn't speak. Not out of awkwardness, but because there was nothing left to say. Words felt unnecessary, heavy. Instead, we just moved through the day like pieces on a board, avoiding direct paths. We both knew better than to force conversation. It would only expose what we were both trying to understand. For the rest of the day, we kept our distance. We stayed in separate rooms like some silent agreement had been made. I sat by the window in my room, staring out at the street, watching people walk their dogs, carry groceries, live lives that didn't feel as complicated as mine. I tried to write in my journal, but every sentence sounded false. I started a dozen pages and ripped each one out. Nothing I wrote could untangle what I felt. It wasn't guilt, not fully. It wasn't regret either. It was something more fragile, like a crack in a mirror that hadn't shattered yet but couldn't be ignored. That night, we watched TV again. Different show, same couch, same silence. This time, we didn't sit at opposite ends. Not side by side either, just close enough to feel it. That invisible pull. I didn't dare look at him, and yet I was aware of every movement, every shift in his posture, every breath he took. And I knew he could feel it too. The tension wasn't gone. It was just held back, balanced. It made me question who I was becoming. I had always thought of myself as responsible, quiet, someone who stayed out of trouble. I followed the rules, played it safe. And now I was sitting next to someone who had been introduced into my life as family, and I wasn't just comfortable with that. I was drawn to it. That terrified me. I spent hours trying to label what was happening. Was it loneliness? Hormones? Boredom? Or was it something real? Something I wasn't ready to admit? I kept cycling through possibilities, none of them fitting quite right. All I knew was that nothing in me wanted to undo what had happened. But I also knew that if we weren't careful, if we didn't draw a line, the next time might not be as simple as a kiss. And that scared me more than anything else. So I did what I always do when I feel unsure. I shut down. I convinced myself to bury the memory, to call it a momentary lapse, to treat it like a dream I hadn't meant to remember. But part of me already knew. We hadn't reached the edge yet. We were only getting closer to it. I woke up with my head resting on his shoulder. That was the hook. The first second of the day. No time to process. No space to pretend. I opened my eyes to soft morning light, a muted TV screen, and the sudden realization that I had fallen asleep next to him on the couch. And I hadn't moved away. Neither had he. I jerked upright too quickly, making the blanket fall to the floor. He stirred but didn't say anything. Didn't even look at me. Just stretched, stood up, and disappeared down the hall. That was all. No questions. No reaction. Just silence, as if this was normal. As if it didn't mean anything. But it did. I sat there in the same position for what felt like hours. My legs folded beneath me, my thoughts scrambling. Why hadn't I pulled away last night? At what point had I crossed the boundary between comfort and danger? I had no answers, just a burning sensation in my chest that wouldn't go away. The rest of the day was blurry. We didn't see each other. Not really. I heard him in the hallway, in the kitchen, the shower. But we never crossed paths. It was like we were deliberately orbiting around each other, careful not to collide. But it didn't help. Avoidance didn't undo what had happened. And deep down, I didn't want it to. I kept trying to rationalize. Maybe this was all temporary. Maybe it was just emotional confusion, brought on by shared space, shared silence, and two lives that had never been asked how to fit together. But something about that morning, waking up against him, had shifted the ground beneath me. In the evening, I went downstairs, pretending to get a glass of water. He was there, reading something on his phone, his face calm, unreadable. I stood by the sink longer than I needed to, hoping the sound of water would drown out my thoughts. He didn't look up. That should have made it easier. It didn't. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. I felt like I was carrying something fragile in my chest, like a glass sphere that could shatter if I made one wrong move. There was no plan, no strategy, no clarity. Just a constant push and pull. I wasn't proud of what I felt, but I also wasn't ready to erase it. This wasn't about romance or even attraction. It was something quieter, something rooted in vulnerability. We were both alone in different ways, and somehow that loneliness had built a bridge between us. And once I admitted that, I couldn't unadmit it. The question now wasn't whether something had happened. It was whether it would happen again. I didn't know the answer, but I was afraid of how much I wanted to find out. It happened in the kitchen. Again. But this time, it wasn't accidental. It wasn't late at night, and it wasn't masked by the flicker of a TV screen or the weight of shared silence. It was early evening, the kind of time when everything feels neutral, ordinary, safe. I'd gone downstairs to clean the counter. That was the excuse I gave myself. The truth was, I knew he'd be there. I'd heard the sound of cabinets opening. I waited a few seconds longer than I needed to before following. That's how I knew I wasn't innocent in this. When I walked in, he was facing the sink. The light above him made the room feel smaller, warmer. I pretended to wipe the table. It was already clean. He didn't look at me, but I could feel the air shift. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't tense. It was charged. For a few seconds, I stood there frozen, holding a towel I didn't need, watching the space between us shrink in my mind. And then he turned. Slowly, deliberately. His eyes found mine. There was nothing dramatic in his expression, just quiet recognition. And I stepped closer. I didn't think. I didn't weigh it against all the reasons I shouldn't. I just moved. 2 steps, then one more. And before I could stop myself, I reached up, just slightly, and kissed him. It was soft. Still, like holding your breath in a room where no one else exists. He didn't pull away, and I didn't either. When we did separate, we didn't move far. We stayed there, faces inches apart, just breathing. I could hear the hum of the fridge, the sound of my own pulse. My hands stayed clenched at my sides. This time, there was no pretending it didn't mean something. We stood like that for what felt like forever, neither of us speaking, and then I turned and left the room. Not quickly, not dramatically. Just calmly, like walking out of a place you know you'll return to. In my room, I sat on the floor with my back against the bed and stared at the wall. My body felt still, but my thoughts moved too fast. What just happened wasn't a mistake. It wasn't confusing. It was intentional. And that terrified me. It wasn't physical desire I was wrestling with. It was the implications, the meaning, the quiet truth that this wasn't just about him. It was about me. About who I was becoming. About the fact that maybe I had crossed a line not because I lost control, but because part of me wanted to. And if I wanted it, what did that say about me? I didn't have answers. I didn't know if I'd ever have them. But I did know this. I wasn't confused anymore. Not about what was happening, not about what I felt. I had made a choice, and now I would have to live with it. I found out he was leaving from my father. Not from him, not in a conversation, not even in passing. My father mentioned it casually over dinner, in the middle of a sentence, like he was talking about the weather. He's heading to the city next month, he said, pouring himself a glass of water. College finally confirmed everything. I felt it like a physical hit. One sentence dropped between bites of food, and the floor shifted under me. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My fork hovered in midair, and I just nodded like I already knew. Like it didn't matter. But it did. It mattered more than I was ready to admit. He hadn't told me. After everything that had happened, after everything we'd crossed and felt and shared, he said nothing. Not a word. No warning. No explanation. And the silence said more than anything he could have confessed. That night, I waited to hear his footsteps. I waited for the door to creak, for him to knock, for some kind of sign that this wasn't just ending without acknowledgement. But the hallway stayed quiet. My door stayed closed. And so did his. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, arms tight around my pillow, heart pounding with a rhythm that made no sense. I wasn't angry. I was hollow. I wasn't betrayed. I was erased. Like what had happened between us was nothing but a pause in his life. Something forgettable. Something temporary. Sometimes I think I owe it to him. That honesty is part of love. That carrying a secret, even silently, is still a form of distance. That he deserves every piece of me, not just the curated ones. Other times, I think silence is mercy. Because what happened back then, it didn't follow me into this marriage. I didn't bring it into our home. I buried it. I grieved it. I made peace with it in the only way I knew how, by moving forward. And yet, it still visits me in quiet moments. Not as guilt, but as memory. He asks me sometimes why I stare off so long when I think no one's watching, or why I sometimes tense when I hear a familiar song. I tell him I'm tired, that it's nothing. And maybe it is. Or maybe it's the part of me I never fully reclaimed. I don't know what's right. I truly don't. Part of me wants to confess, even if it shatters something. Just so I can breathe clean again. Just so I can stop looking at him and wondering if he'd still look at me the same after hearing everything. But another part of me knows. Some truths don't set you free. Some just shift the weight from one person's chest to another's. So I carry it. Quietly. Respectfully. I hold it like a box in the back of a closet, sealed, marked, untouched. Not because I'm afraid, but because I know what it cost me to move on. I tell myself that what matters is the life I live now, the love I give now, the mother I am, the partner I strive to be. I tell myself that the past is only a threat if I give it power. But some nights, when the house is quiet and the lights are off and I hear my husband's steady breathing beside me, I feel the weight of that sealed box again. And I wonder, not if I'll ever tell him, but if I'll ever stop needing to.